It's not the church that bothers me, it's church culture. I don't have a problem with the gospel, I have a problem with the church. These are some things that you might have heard somebody say, one of your friends at church. Is this an accurate description of what's going on, or is there a better way to look at it? This is what we're going to be discussing today on the Perfectly Honest Podcast.
Perfectly Honest Podcast. Doo-doo-doo. Welcome back to the Perfectly Honest Podcast, where we talk about marriage, family, and our testimonies of Jesus Christ. I'm Kiana.
And I'm Michael.
And if I'm being perfectly honest, I made a mistake today.
What?
I let Coleman run around with his diaper off, and he peed straight into the hole of our ukulele.
Yeah, that was definitely a mistake.
Yeah.
It was really funny though, because we were trying to introduce him to instruments, and yeah, I guess for whatever reason you were thinking, let's do it with him naked.
He was just bothered by his diaper. I was trying to help a brother out.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. If I'm being perfectly honest, I had an emotional roller coaster today.
Oh yeah, there was that too.
Yeah, so it's just I think just sometimes with school you're just like, should I be doing this or should I be out hiking the woods, you know? But it ended out on a really good note.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is because of family for me.
Totally.
Yeah.
Had a good call with your parents.
Had a good call with my parents. Had a really good evening with Coleman and Kiana. So
Yeah.
it was just great. It was awesome. Today on the Perfectly Honest Podcast, we're going to be talking about church culture, which this might get into some controversy here.
Ooh.
But we hope that you guys take it as just as lighthearted as it is, because this isn't like a top pressing issue, but we thought this might be a really good thing to talk about, because sometimes someone says a catchphrase and then we all just
Start saying
going
it.
along with it because it kind of resonates with us in some way. But we just want to discuss how accurate is this phrase, and just like I said at the beginning of the podcast, people have said I don't have a problem with this aspect of the church, but I do have a problem with church culture or the people.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give some of my combative ideas to that idea today, and we just wanted to have a discussion about that.
Totally. Well, it's funny because Michael came to me with this topic where he's like, oh, it just bothers me when people say this. And I'm like, oh, I know I have definitely said that before.
I think I've said it too.
Where you're going to bear your testimony, or you're at a testimony meeting and it bothers you. Well, this is what would bother me when people would be like, oh, I know the church is true. I'm like, how could you say that? The gospel is true. And
Right.
The Book of Mormon is true. How could you say the church is true? It's made up of imperfect people. But Michael's explained to me so many times, the church's organization is perfect, and that's because God created it and restored it in this way. Right.
And when we're talking about the organization, we're not talking about in every little way, when sometimes there's callings that are created and sometimes they go away.
Yeah.
But we're talking about in the largest sense, which is basically God said, hey, I want a prophet. I want a first presidency. I want the quorum of the 12. And that actually took a little bit of time to form, right? Ultimately, it created this perfect net, or this perfect system to run the rest of the imperfect parts of the church. And the reason that the church is imperfect is because of us.
Yeah.
Right?
To be human is to err. What is that little quote?
Yeah. And even all the leaders of the church that, this is the life for us to become perfect, right? So God is doing the best that he can with us, and he needs to allow us to live our life and be human.
Yeah.
So just want to get that kind of out of the way, that the church organization is we're not really going into this about oh, well, what about this one calling that created issues, or what about that Relief Society president that said this? It's okay, we get that those are some things, right? But we're just going to allow for human error.
Yes. So church culture, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that phrase?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is church bubbles.
Okay.
So when we talk about the Utah bubble, the Provo bubble, and people in Provo who maybe grown up there be like, it doesn't exist. Okay, it does. Come on. There's little bubbles, and there's a California bubble. There's a bubble in Lincoln too, where I'm from.
Yeah.
It's just like when we talk about culture, we're talking about kind of like a dynamic, like
in a certain area. Yeah.
Now, culture in society has kind of changed a lot because of online, right? Because you're getting culture from Utah pretty easily because if you're sitting on your phone on social media, there's a whole bubble there, right? So that's kind of the first thing that I think of, especially when people say, well, it's just the church culture that stinks, So I think that can mean a couple of things. So here's what I want to ask you is like, why do you think that gets under people's skin so much? Like, why do you think it bothers people so much? Like maybe their own culture.
I think it probably boils down to them having an experience that left a sour taste in their mouth.
Right.
Or there are a lot of voices in the world telling them that the church is wrong and evil. And so they start looking for faults in everything.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like you'll be sitting down in a sacrament meeting and you start nitpicking at the bishop, at the chorister, at the way the sacrament is administered. And when you look for flaws, like you're going to find them.
Yeah, exactly.
No one's perfect, but it comes back to the scripture of like, how can you tell your brother that he, what is that? The scripture. It's like, oh, why would you tell your brother off for having like something in his foot when you have a mote in your eye?
Yep.
You can look for faults all you want, but when your finger is pointing outward, you still have 3 fingers pointing back at you.
Right. I don't know what like a mote, like not to really fully pick apart that, but like, I don't know what that actually is, but I think I remember talking about it one time was like, it'd be like a really big disturbance.
Yeah.
Like the Lord was kind of basically trying to say like, how could you, basically say to your brother, like, hey, you can't see anything when you've got a blindfold on.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. Like that would just be ridiculous for you to say. So it was just kind of making a comparison there, But so it is interesting because it's like oftentimes we are trying to put blame on other people.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. This happens a lot. Like this happened to me. Like I went on a mission, went home to my home ward and got to be around some of my youth leaders and started to realize like some of the imperfections because I had new glasses on kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any, like, it was kind of an eye-opening experience. I didn't have any frustration because the thing that you think is like, well, they were just trying their best. And like, what if it was just given to me just to run this whole ward, right?
Yeah.
Like right now, like I'm not perfect. Does that mean that the church should suffer because of that? Like people should leave because I have problems? And you want to try to be more like Christ. You encourage people to come, but that happens a lot. Like people leave because of other people.
Yeah. Well, and I will say that to dive into maybe the more negative parts of church culture, quote unquote.
Yes.
There has become this sort of like tattletale-y, pointing out flaws, pointing out sin, people feeling better than other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that is like something that's encouraged by the church. I think that could happen in any organization.
Right. Right.
It's just this holier than thou mentality.
Yeah.
And you don't find that everywhere. I'm not saying that that's like inherently part of church culture. I'm saying that that's something that would leave a sour taste in someone's mouth.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that's interesting is like, that's not a direct result of somebody intently listening to the prophets and apostles. That's a result of somebody living in the church and learning about sin and what the results are and thinking to its logical end.
Yeah.
Thinking about like, oh, well, where's the line? Or like, okay, I'm doing this, but like not doing this, and also thinking I want to be helpful. And so I'm going to make sure people know that this is a sin or like this, I saw that this behavior of somebody led to this outcome. How much evidence do you have on that? That's an anecdotal piece of evidence that might have just not as been as helpful.
Yeah.
Just saying like, because this person smoked a cigarette once, he smoked for the rest of his life. And that always happens. It's like, I've heard stories of people who smoked a cigarette once and they said, that means that I don't want to do that because it sucked.
Because it was awful.
You know, and not saying go smoke a cigarette. I'm just saying like, it's not always true. Yeah.
Well, and I think when people are so stuck in that mentality, they haven't really dove into the gospel. They're so focused on applications and surface level, the
Yes.
to-do list, the checklist of how to be a good member of the church.
Right.
This like, okay, I do X, Y, and Z.
What are all the commandments? You can only
Yeah.
there's only one checklist commandment, and that's tithing, which is awesome. It's
Yeah.
one you could be perfect at doing. But anyway,
Oh, that's a good point. But I feel like if you really have your heart and sight set on Christ and you are really paying attention to what the prophet is saying,
yeah,
like you are going to be so enveloped in God's love and focused on that feeling and growing closer to God that you're not going to look around at your neighbor and finger point and be like, oh, did you see so-and-so? You're not going to feel the need to be gossipy
right.
because it's not going to matter to you.
Exactly. Kiana's bringing up a really good point, and I want to hone in on this, and she's been kind of saying this a lot, is look to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, don't just look inward selfishly, but look at what you're doing, and just think about, and you don't have to do a lot of comparisons. Like, that's not what we're saying. We're like, don't compare yourself to somebody else. What you need to do is just say like, hey, look, I am not perfect. And so I should have a more loving heart because that's what I need. I need charity. So I should give charity.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the apostles, the prophets, they're all saying this.
Yeah.
They're saying it over and over. And sometimes we're not receiving it that way, but they're always saying it.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like with Prophet Nelson's talk on being a peacemaker.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, you know, if that elder came home early from his mission, he doesn't need the whole ward talking about it and gossiping about it. It's no one
Exactly.
else's business.
Yeah. And you know what? This was really cool. In one of my classes in Elders Quorum a while ago, the teacher shared an experience about, I think I might have shared this before, but I'll share it again. His sister came home early from her mission because she needed to resolve some things at home that she didn't do before she went, that she should have. That was related to sin. I don't really know what was going on. And this brother, he just spent class talking about how proud he was of his sister for making this decision to come home and to make things right. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing conversation to have because it kind of turns your heart a little bit. You know, you look at that person as like not somebody who has an obligation to go out and be righteous and only be righteous. And if they don't, they failed and we should judge them.
Right.
You look at them as someone who also needs Christ, who also needs help. And in that way, she was able to help other people. She shared her story and helped some other missionaries too. So it's like, there's always ways to minister, especially when we have sin. And that is something that I think could be added to our culture. I would say that is a hard part of our culture that does need some, smoothing out across the church.
Yeah. Just thinking about like the good aspects, I guess.
Yeah.
The positives. Where else on earth are you going to find an organization that the second you move in and have your records brought to your area's church, that there's going to be someone at your doorstep making sure that you're all moved in? If you need any help, there's going to be people offering meals.
Yeah.
There's going to be people offering to babysit your kids. Like, church culture, I would say, is service culture.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, you just had a baby. Like, what can we do to help? Let's start a meal train for this person. It's praying over the members of your congregation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I wanted to say this was my controversial thought to it's not the church, it's the church culture. I think church culture is amazing. And that's my feeling on it,
Yeah.
honestly. We as people being surrounded by each other, we just get sick of each other sometimes. That's
Yeah.
just natural. That I don't care where you are. That's just culture.
Yeah.
That's what we, like culture comes with its ups and its downs. But church culture in particular is incredible. Like wherever you go, it's going to be the same, pretty much,
Yeah.
generally speaking. But what other church brings in so many different cultures? I'm talking about races, different ethnicities that are here. They like enrich the cultures, and then also different people who are rich and poor, different demographics, people with lots of different experiences, people who came from other churches even sometimes come and they enrich the culture. Now, I'm not saying like, okay, if you're not a member of the church, like your church culture is not as good. I'm impartial because I'm a member of this church. So
Yeah.
just take it that way. But the same could be said about like your church as well. Generally speaking, Christian churches have this ability to bring a lot of diverse people together. And that is amazing. And on top of that, going with what Kiana just said, is that you are in an environment that's so service oriented and
Yeah.
filled with really good intentions, right? Not every ward is the same. Sometimes you don't get as warm of a welcome, like that. But generally speaking, that's what is encouraged.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that the culture is really amazing and has some rough spots because we're human.
Yeah. And that's something that we talked about in my child, family, and advocacy class. It's that people shape culture and culture shapes people. So if there's something about church culture in your area that you don't like, I hate to say it, but the change starts with you.
Yeah.
Like if there's something that you want to see be like happening within church culture in your ward, in your stake,
Yeah.
it has to start with you. It's like the Michael Jackson song. I'm looking at the man in the mirror.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get off.
I just 100% agree with that. I mean, like, if you're like, oh, people don't say hi to me, then go say hi.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Then in a few weeks, people are going to all be saying hi to you because you're approachable.
Yeah.
You're the person who got the guts to, I mean, like, imagine, like, you go to a ward and, like, who knows? Most of them might be introverts and you just don't know it.
I will say, speaking for us, we are in a student married ward, which is a very, like, a new experience for us.
Yeah.
And there's always people moving in and out. And I think when you are new moving into a ward and you don't know who else is new or who has been there for like the longest time,
Yeah.
you kind of wait for the people that have been in the ward to come say hi. But guess what? They can't keep track of everyone who's moving in and out.
Yeah. Yeah. And they might be thinking like, oh, is that someone who just moved in and I don't realize?
Yeah.
Or like, is that someone who's been here for a while and I don't realize? And they're like, oh, it'd be awkward if I introduce myself and I already have. Or,
Yeah.
So it's like, it's good for you to take a step, just be like, say hi to one person.
Yeah, just set a goal. Or if you're like, oh, no one sat next to me, go sit next to someone else.
Yeah. Okay, so I love this discussion. I want to move on to a different kind of topic within this, though.
Yeah.
What do we do about the individual members who actually really do just give you a hard time?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually have a story for this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and this is maybe kind of a not bad story to share because it was a bishop that I had trouble with.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I went to this bishop and shared a very personal, very hard experience here up at college. And I had him turn the finger on me and say like, oh, if you had had the Spirit with you, this bad thing wouldn't have happened to you, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it was like earth shattering because I came in expecting like love and seeking help on how to forgive someone who had wronged me.
Right.
And instead it was like, oh, well, you did a bad thing, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so I think you have to look at where people are coming from.
Right.
ultimately I was able to take a step back and see that he was coming from a very protective standpoint, kind of like a dad.
Yeah.
And he saw a daughter of God hurting, and he wants to protect daughters of God.
Right. And so he was like, here's
like,
advice for next time.
Yeah. He's like, you have to protect yourself. You have to shield yourself. So that would be what I would say, is to take a step back and understand that people have such a different perspective, such a different life experience from you. And there's a
Right.
reason why they are acting the way they are.
Right.
And if that's causing conflict, you can talk to them about it. You can open that door.
Yeah. Yeah.
And discuss your differences and come to a compromise.
Yeah, that's totally true. That was a really good example, because that is what people really struggle with. Some people leave the church over stuff like that, but it's good to recognize, like, you know what? I just had a difficult experience with one guy, who's called, who's probably helped a lot of other people, who's actually probably said a lot of other things. He might have even gone home and thought, like, I should not have told that girl that thing, because, like, sometimes you say stuff in the moment, and you're like, oh, that was not right, or I didn't feel right. So maybe he learned from that.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe you learned from that too. And that's kind of part of the experience. Now I have a story to share.
Oh, okay.
This one's a little bit like not as harsh, but if this was like when I was a teacher, so that's about like 14 years old. I was like 13, 14 years old. Got a Sunday school teacher. This is back when we had 3 hours of church on Sunday.
Back in the day.
Back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. Just kidding. I'm not that old. We had a new teacher. None of us had ever seen him before, and it was because he was less active. So he hadn't been coming to church, and someone reached out to him and gave him a calling, and he accepted it.
That's awesome.
And so he came, and this is his first lesson. He says, I can answer any question that you have about the gospel. And we're like, oh, okay. Where are the 3 Nephites, or where's John? And he looked at us and he was like, that's not pertinent to your salvation, young men. And I was like, wow, he can answer any question, because he has the answer that trumps all. So the same teacher, it was fun. We got a good relationship, but the same teacher, man, he would have anger outbursts and stuff all the time, because we were just so frustrating, right?
Teenage boys.
Yeah. So at first it was like, oh, this was kind of like hard. But then when we come back in another week, he said, hey guys, last week, I just want to say I'm sorry, and he said, I'm just trying to be active and good in the church, and that was powerful.
Yeah.
And so it was like, it just taught me people are really imperfect. And they're on the road to salvation just as much as any of us are. It doesn't matter what their age is. Later on, he became a bishopric member and always came up to me and was like, hey, Mike, how's it going?
Oh, cute.
And always loved being with him. But he taught me so much because of his example of trying.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a more lighthearted example, but it was also like, I had to deal with it by keeping on coming back, because some people did get offended, and they wouldn't show up a week
to
later.
his class.
Yeah, or they wouldn't show up to his class. They'd roam the halls or something. But when we showed up, he would always try to make amends.
Yeah.
And I think that at least most of the people, if not all, didn't go. I don't think anyone really went less active, but I knew it was hard for some people.
Totally. That was a really good story.
Yeah, it was fun. Okay, I'm going to share spiritual thought now.
Yeah.
Okay. So this came from the Peacemakers Needed. I know we always go back to this talk, but it was
so good.
It's been running our lives. We just love that talk so much, and we always want to bring it back. So this is like a quote from like after he'd talked about like making
President
peace.
Nelson.
President Nelson,
Yeah.
the prophet. He was talking about like coming to Christ, bringing peace, not causing contention in the home, and then he said this: at this point, you may be thinking that this message would really help someone you know. Perhaps you are hoping that it will help him or her to be nicer to you. I hope it will. But I also hope that you will look deeply into your heart to see if there are shards of pride or jealousy that prevent you from becoming a peacemaker. And I just love that, because he was just reminding us, he's like, this is a great message, but stop pushing it onto somebody else. Take it on yourself.
Starts with you.
it starts with you.
I love that. That's so good. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode. We're so glad that you guys were here. If you want to follow along for some more fun content, we post regularly on Instagram at The Perfectly Honest Podcast. And we will link below in the show notes our website and opportunities for advertisements.
Yeah, so check those, check the show notes. We got links there. We're really trying to grow as much as we can. So that would be really helpful because we want to have this be sustainable for us so we can help more people. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And we love you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.